Hello, and thank you for joining us. I'm Mark Trahant. This week we focus on a word, a concept that is so often front and center in Indian country. The word sovereignty, as in tribal sovereignty. Vice President Kamala Harris thrust it into the presidential campaign at her first rally as the Democratic standard bearer.
And as president, I will tell you, I will always honor tribal sovereignty and respect tribal self-determination.
Her opponent, Donald Trump,
America great again,
in his previous campaign, echoed those thoughts, saying he, quote, is committed to respecting tribal sovereignty. The thoughts are welcome in Indigenous communities, though longtime political observer Dick Trudell cautions presidential candidates often promise to back sovereignty and then fall short in their actions. So what is meant by this broad term, sovereignty? Turns out, it can mean many things. To frontline activists like Onondaga citizen Hickory Edwards, it means looking out for the health of the planet's water.
Well, it's one of the reasons why I start becoming a water protector, is coming on these waters and seeing directly firsthand the sickness on these waters. We have all these pollutants that come in where some places where we can't swim.
And it means reestablishing a presence on the continent's waterways.
The original waterways were the original highways of America. And so what this journey is doing is reaffirming our territorial jurisdiction over our water.
To others, food sovereignty is sovereignty.
Okay. So over here, we do have our, Aboriginal corn, our Metacom corn. And then on this side is some sweet corn.
I think food is the most important key to all of this, because food is the central point that we all have to have every single day. It's something that connects us as humans around the world. Yeah, and part of the steps of food sovereignty is just having local control and non-governmental control over food systems.
And to many, it means land back. The one-word encapsulation of the fight to restore original ownership and stewardship to native land. And sometimes that means direct action.
This is our stolen part of the lake and stolen pieces of our land here.
Like McGeezy Spears, who breaks Minnesota law every year by fishing on Red Lake before the season opens.
We've proven our points here to the Minnesota DNR and the Beltrami County Sheriff's Department that we're in charge of this lake here by proving it.
And sometimes that means art, like Nicholas Galanin's installation in New York City that draws attention to the land.
I often think of the chosen histories that are represented in place opposed to things that are, purposefully ignored and I feel like this work offers a lot of entrance for various perspectives in a space like this, whether it's people that are navigating colonial borders, whether it's colonial borders that cross Indigenous territories in space, and I feel like this touches on a lot of that.
Sometimes that means long-term efforts to get Congress to act. ICT's Stuart Huntington followed one such story that ended this summer with a major victory.
Yesterday was probably the most historic day on Leech Lake Reservation since the reservation was established. I mean, it doesn't get any bigger than that for us.
Tribal, state, and federal officials gathered on the Leech Lake Reservation to celebrate the partial righting of a 20th century wrong.
Thank you for joining us in celebrating this return of 11,700 acres of land that was illegally taken from Leech Lake. Yes.
In the 1940s and 50s, a succession of Bureau of Indian Affairs leaders illegally transferred thousands of acres of tribal lands into the Chippewa National Forest without telling the native owners.
A lot of times they didn't even know that the land was transferred out from underneath them until they came back years later and they would find a locked Forest Service gate on the road into their land and be like, what's going on here? I'm trying to go out to my family's hunting land, trying to go.
For 70 plus years, Leech Lakers worked to get the land back. The work culminated in the 2020 Leech Lake Band Ojibwe Reservation Restoration Act, signed into law by President Trump. The law reads, the BIA incorrectly interpreted an order of the Secretary of the Interior to mean it could sell land without consent of the Indian owners. There's scant evidence, however, that they misinterpreted anything, as it was a particularly rapacious era at the BIA where the main focus was the termination of Indian nations. One of the directors during this time was Dylan Meyer, who previously oversaw the mass incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II.
This land that I'm walking here right now is land that was flat out stolen in the mid-20th century just because federal officials and others thought they could.
It took the Forest Service a few years to survey the land, and today, delineated in multiple parcels throughout the reservation, it is back in Leech Lake hands. I asked Elder Michael Smith, Sr., to tell me what the return means.
Yesterday was a beautiful day for what happened. It was something that meant a lot to the Shinabe people. Because in the past, they come and took that land. And they used many tactics to get it at the cheapest expense they can get it.
Minnesota Senator Tina Smith was on hand to mark the transfer and look ahead.
Today we are celebrating the restoration of land illegally taken from the Leech Lake Band. So as I'm sure you know, during this lengthy process, surveyors discovered another approximately 4,000 acres that had been taken and had not been included in the original bill. And so I want you all to know that we have a new bill to restore those about 4,000 acres, and I will not rest until that piece of the work is done.
And prophecies fulfilled.
Many years ago, an elder, he said, "Ego bombing again, Nagach, Kajamini Gomin, the Kimanan." Which meant, don't worry about it. Because further on down the road, they're going to give us back our land. Little chunks at a time. It's not going to
The
be
band plans to use some of the land from this year's transfer for much needed housing.
And also leaving some of it as like a natural forest. We would like to bring some of our animals that have gone away because their habitat has been destroyed from logging and stuff.
And finally, I asked Elder Smith if he had a message for future generations.
Oh, wait. Well, that's yo, guys, Gagi get to on yo. Gain each gay watch na big. Na good job, it's too na why yo. Cause way back to be Jinago. Yo, Paneja. The Bama say what yo, the Wabanta na wa, Gego, Gashana should do na wa, Jimaji Kitty what yo, we seen win. Maskaki. That's yo, Nagach, that's yo, Panego, Jini, we quaint on na wa yo, cause way back Bijinago, we go to wa go, Manadug. No kamasnani na subasanani ka we do car to audio gin gasui waki jinago mi gwech tashin in yo bizinta yegi mi no yo oh mi gwech. You want it in English now?
No, that's good. Those that understand will understand.
Yeah, they'll understand.
On the Leech Lake Reservation, Stuart Huntington, ICT.
Tribal sovereignty can also take hold in business. I recently visited the Morongo Band of Mission Indians in California to check in on that nation's groundbreaking effort to control electrical transmission lines crossing the territory. The future of clean energy runs through indigenous lands, including here on the Morongo Indian Nation. This is a story about tribal sovereignty, the energy transition, and innovation. Think about a light switch. We flip the switch and the light comes on. That's the way it's worked for decades. The energy grid, the system we have built, connects your house, an office, even a factory. But the green energy revolution is changing all of that. Now we need a lot more electricity to power everything from cars to banks of computers. We need more.
The demand for energy, for electricity in particular, has just skyrocketed. Data centers.
Sudine Kelly is a former federal energy regulatory commissioner. She's watched communities trying to figure out how to add capacity to the electric grid.
It's a challenge. Nobody wants a transmission line in their backyard or even in their view shed or on their ranch or in the national forest.
A generation ago, electric grids on tribal lands were handled largely by the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the electric utilities. But the recognition of tribal sovereignty was a game changer. Enter the Morongo Band of Mission Indians and Southern California Edison.
Utilities have their mindset is they'll, just come in and take your lands through eminent domain, and there's not much you can do about it. And I imagine that's what they can do anywhere else except for when it comes to a sovereign. And they have to get approval from us.
A few years ago, Edison wanted to upgrade its lines through the Morongo Nation under right-of-way pacts negotiated in the 1950s.
Those were coming due, and we knew this. And Edison was going to come back and want to renegotiate.
So the utility had to work with the tribe.
Edison needed to upgrade that line to bring more renewable from Arizona into California, where there's great demand for it. And that upgrade would require a wider right-of-way.
So we held out, and they eventually had to come around and negotiate with us.
And so Edison set about discussing with the tribe, is there a way that we can do this that's a win-win?
Someone on the Morongo tribe's team suggested that the tribe own the line, something that routinely happens with community-owned utilities.
And that's how we got this unique and first of its kind agreement that recognizes the tribe's significant contribution of its land.
This was a very difficult project to get together. The tribe had to build a whole team. And we didn't have any of these people. We just had an idea. And we had to get lawyers. We had to get lawyers in the field transmission line.
Ownership changed the nature of the deal. A $400 million package that expanded the transmission lines, bringing clean energy to Southern California.
We feel it's a good model for tribes all across the country to look at and adapt and see if they can use any part of it. I think it would be good for other tribes. I know it would be. It was very good for us.
It's a historic partnership for the company, a first of its kind joint venture between a tribal-owned transmission company and SCE. And the project has been a really important addition to bringing clean energy to Southern California. And it is just a really important part of the clean energy future. So we're really grateful to the tribe for the partnership. The clean energy future is just essential in every possible way. We know that culturally, the tribes have embodied sustainability, and that concept has, thank goodness, spread to other aspects of society and led to improved planning, improved resource use, and improved infrastructure.
With this, the first time this was ever done, where we became partners with Edison in the transmission lines that went across the reservation. And we did all of this with the tribe investing, and the tribe being a partner with the utility, which I don't know has ever been done, at no increase to the ratepayers.
One of our goals was to produce a cleaner product produced by Southern California Edison. That was something that we addressed in this arrangement.
The new transmission lines do more than move energy across the desert. The process also is about what's possible when tribes, the state, and energy companies work together.
I just want to share this with the other tribes because it is possible to sit down and negotiate these types of deals. They're not easy. It takes a real commitment, on the both parties. But if you work at it, it's extremely possible.
As the country wrestles with a clean energy future and an aging infrastructure, so many of the solutions come back here to Indian country.
It's a presidential election year, and in just 1 month, the United States will elect a new leader. Here to tell us more about this are our regular contributors, Holly Cook-Macaro and Michael Staub. Thank you both for joining us. The first question that I have is I just want to give both of you a minute or so to talk about the issues that Indigenous voters and Native elected leaders are concerned about this election cycle. We'll start with Holly.
Thanks, Polly. Like most of America, I think Indian country is first and foremost concerned about the economy and what each candidate proposes to do in regards to making sure that America is going in the right direction. And specific to Indian country, beyond that, I've heard a lot about climate justice issues. I've heard a lot about a respect for tribal sovereignty, and we're seeing a dialogue in this election that I really hoped we had moved past. We see a Republican candidate for in a very tight race against longtime ally and supporter of Indian country, John Tester in Montana, who's putting forth a rhetoric and old tropes about Native Americans that I don't want to repeat here, but you can certainly check in the headlines for what he is putting out there about Native Americans. And so I think most of Indian country is looking forward. We've been in this Renaissance era about new representation and growth in the political arena. I really hear a lot from tribal leadership about how candidates feel about their respect for tribal sovereignty. And that seems like an easy line, but respect for tribal sovereignty also includes an honoring of our treaties. And many of the promises that were made that are embodied within those treaties, they often take the shape of funding for tribal programs that fund the promises that were made within those treaties, like housing and healthcare and scholarships and education, and so many of those things that are important. So when you say you honor tribal sovereignty, I think when the rubber hits the road, it also has to be in the form of support for tribal programs and a very deep understanding of what tribal sovereignty is and tribal self-determination.
I certainly agree that first and foremost with all Americans, including American Indians, is that the economy is at the forefront of everyone's mind right now. We're seeing some good numbers come out of the economy, but it was a rough ride to get here. And while inflation has slowed down, we still took a pretty steep ride to get to where we are. And the American people are feeling that. Unfortunately, with what's going on the Eastern Seaboard with the union striking, we're going to see another economic issue coming up very quickly with the supply chain. And it's going to have an effect on the November election, especially this close to it. I agree with Holly on a lot of the same issues when it comes to sovereignty being at the foremost of our elected leaders. We're certainly having our own challenges here in Oklahoma with sovereignty. We had a great win in the McGirt decision in 2020, but we're still having a challenge with working with the state government here. So I know that a lot of our elected leaders here in Oklahoma and across Indian country are looking for leadership that will answer that sovereignty question and what it means. I like to look at it more from an energy perspective for getting economic development out in places where we don't have a lot of infrastructure. And one of the things that tribes are itching to do right now is develop some of that infrastructure through the energy programs that are available. And also that includes developing natural resources without the oversight of the paternalistic federal government.
Holly, where does Vice President Kamala Harris stand when it comes to tribal sovereignty?
Well, first, her name is pronounced Kamala, and much like we ask for the respect to pronounce our names right, I think we should always do that for our vice president as well. She has been very, I think, explicit and flat out in her comments regarding tribal sovereignty and her respect for it. She made a comment in August at the Arizona rally in front of thousands, and it was right after, I think it was one of the first rallies after she became the de facto nominee before the convention. And she said, as president, I will always honor tribal sovereignty and respect tribal self-determination. She made another statement in regards to Lumbee recognition, where she continued to expand on that statement, where she said she will always advocate for tribal nations and Native communities, honor tribal sovereignty, and fight for a future where every Native person can realize their aspirations. So I think this week we should see an announcement of the official policy paper from the Harris-Walz campaign, and there will be more detail, I think, on her plans and how she plans to stand behind those statements.
Where does former President Donald Trump stand when it comes to tribal sovereignty?
Well, I would say that he actually had to learn a lot when he became president about Indian country. His few interactions were obviously in the gaming world in New Jersey and Atlantic City specifically, and then some in Connecticut. I think he got much better at it in understanding the perspective of Native Americans. He did his best to acknowledge some of our veterans, and he did have regular meetings, though they were a little different than what you find with under the Obama regime. He did have regular meetings with stakeholders and with tribal leaders on specific issues. I think he's willing to learn more about that, and he's willing to listen, and maybe not go out with the same line that we're used to hearing and quite frankly, not seeing the fruits of here in Indian country. People make a lot of promises and we don't see it come through. I think he's willing to listen.
Where do the presidential candidates stand when it comes to securing the southern border?
I'll go first because I think mine's the easiest. I mean, Donald Trump ran on building the wall. It's one of his foremost issues. It's been his foremost issue since 2015. It is very much about securing the southern border. I know that comes across as anti-immigrant, but it isn't really meant to be anti-immigrant. It is about doing immigration correctly and keeping the border safe. And he built the wall. I mean, I don't know what else to say about his position.
And I think Vice President Harris has been very clear that she wants to, balance policing our borders with calls for a better way to welcome immigrants and the flow of goods into America legally. She has really challenged Trump's own record on immigration and migration because he really did nothing to fix the legal immigration system or address the asylum system while he was president, in spite of his rallying really a literal rally cry to build the wall. But he failed to address a shortage of immigration judges, a shortage of border agents, and he also killed a very hard-fought bipartisan package that would have overhauled the federal immigration system, so that he can do, and folks who speak for him can do what they're doing now, which is campaign on the disorder at the border.
Another important issue this cycle is around access to abortion care and IVF. And so, Michael, we'll start with you. Where does President Trump stand on those issues?
Well, this is a place where he and I definitely agree. He is pro-IVF. I think there's a lot of misconception out there about the Republican stance on that. We're pro-family, and IVF is folks trying to create a family. I think one of the places where there's also misconception, and Mr. Trump continues to say this, is it should be a question answered in the states. One of the things with Roe v. Wade that we never had was an option for the people to express their viewpoint in a way we do, which is through polling, through a vote. It came from 9 men on the Supreme Court. The way it's going to happen now, these questions are going to be answered by the people in each state, and the people have an opportunity to voice their opinion versus just protesting. That's the president's viewpoint, and I think it's the correct viewpoint. Let the people vote.
And Vice President Harris has been very vocal in her disagreement with the 2022 Supreme Court decision that overturned Roe v. Wade and left it up to the states to determine their own policies on abortion legality. If we are a union of states, we don't have these federal laws, we might still have slavery in this country, right? But these overarching laws that help determine the bigger policies Kamala Harris has been the face of the fight for reproductive rights and access in America for the Biden administration. And the Biden administration has really worked hard to limit the impacts of the overturning of Roe v. Wade, and she is committed to that position.
I'm going to push back just a little bit on that, if that's all right. I didn't care much for looking at that as saying that it's like not being anti-slavery. It's the exact opposite. The question is, who has the right here? Is it the female right, or is it the right of the child? The real question that you have to ask yourself is, what purpose does the government ultimately serve? And if it doesn't serve to protect the life of a human being, then it really serves no purpose at all that's good for us. And so we have to make that determination as a people. When do we recognize the right to life? When do we recognize that the government has an obligation and a duty to protect someone's life? That's the question that we're trying to answer here, not just someone's reproductive rights, but someone's right to life.
Then let's bring reasonable gun access into this country as well and protect our children when they're here.
Well, that's all the time that we have. Thank you so much for joining us, Mike and Holly, for this week's IndigiPolitics.
Of course, the battles over sovereignty are not over. It is so important because it represents a marker about our place in the world and our future. But the fight is just as important to the broader community. Let's let Professor Donald Pixico of Arizona State University and Mashpee Wampanoag Chairman Brian Whedon have the last words.
For some Native groups, some Native nations, they actually take sovereignty to mean an obligation or responsibility, so that it's to recognize the sovereignty of other people, to respect other people. And not just that, but for plants and animals, everything that has a spirit.
To us, it's more about preserving and protecting it, for the future generations and all of our relations. When we talk about all of our relations, it's not just the living beings, but it's the other beings that you don't see, and advocating for the whales and the birds and so on and so forth. It's not just our responsibility to take care of each other, but to take care of Mother Earth. And right now, with everything going on in the world, I think it's safe to say that, nobody's really taking care of Mother Earth like she should be taken care of, or else we wouldn't have global warming and all these other issues that we have today.
And that is a slice of our Indigenous world. For all the latest news, visit ictnews.org. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives.